Hi there, and welcome to this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent T. Thanks for joining us here on one of the world's biggest gun talk programs as we chat with the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting. Today's topic is an old chestnut in the gun writing business. It is, what is your 3-gun battery? Well, shooters today, when you say 3-gun, they're thinking, of course, of competition, and that's not what we're talking about. When you ask an old school gun writer about his 3-gun battery, you were talking about what rifle, pistol, and shotgun would he choose if that's all he could have. So it would give you a lot of insight into what the writer thought was important and the reasons why. So I'm going to talk to Roy Huntington today, and we're going to talk about it and discuss what our 3-gun battery would be today. So we'll do that in just a moment. First, I would ask you, please make sure you like and subscribe the podcast. That's how you can support what we're doing. And please listen to this word from our great sponsor, Armscor and Rock Island Armory, and then we'll talk to Roy Huntington.
The STK series blends the advantages of a striker-fired pistol with everything you love about your 1911. The STK100 Ultra has an updated frame with more aggressive side grip panels and checkered front and back straps, but we didn't stop there. You'll see that the optic footprint is now larger, which means even more options for your favorite red dot. The new STK from Rock Island Armory. Experience the power and precision of the Rock today. For more info, visit Armscor.com.
Hey there, Roy.
I always want to say, hey there, hi there, ho there, we're as happy as can be.
Well, we are, because we've got great jobs, and we could be doing other things that aren't as fun as shooting guns and shooting other people's ammunition and talking about it. So
I always say you could be selling paint at Walmart.
Exactly. And if you sell paint at Walmart, there's nothing wrong with it. No. But I think even you would admit what we do's got to be a lot more fun.
I would technically say, because, mere moments ago before I sat down and got dialed in, I was shooting my new little sharps off the back porch.
Oh, how cool.
I know. It's like, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I just got back from another media event where we shot carbines and AR pistols with suppressors and SBRs, and played with some new ammunition from our friends at Fiocchi, and shot the Springfield Kuna, and a good time was had by all.
Good, you got to shoot the Kuna though, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the brace. It's kind of a cool little gun. I'd like to see, like about a 10-inch barrel.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly that'd be better, because the one that I had was very accurate, unlike most of the 9mm AR pistols. Yeah, this one really shot.
Well, we did some live fire shoot house with cans and optics, and my days of doing dynamic entries have long since passed.
I know.
But it was fun with professional instruction of running in the room and ventilating some tangos and harumph,
I know.
So it was a good time. But
I hate to do that anymore, though. When you go to some media event and they say, today we're going to be trained by, it's like, no, man, look, I'm 70 years old. I've been training my whole life. I just really don't. I'll go over there and have a cup of coffee, and you guys go ahead and train,
Well, it was funny. We had a couple of guys, great guys, and they're active duty law enforcement. And one of them is very much into physical fitness. And he said, okay, tomorrow, first thing, 06, we're all going to do PTs and blah, blah, blah. And before I could even speak, folks that know him, author James Tarr goes, well, I'll watch. And I said, well, I'll supervise. So, Jim, we'll hold their coffee. So, my days of PT at 06 are again, long gone. But I don't think anybody did.
Mine were never there. So.
Yep. Well, you suggested an interesting topic, and I got to admit, it's something I'd forgotten about. This thing was like huge 30, 40 years ago in the old school gun magazines. And it was, what is your 3-gun battery? And this was long before 3-gun competition was ever a thing. And this was kind of the idea of what is the rifle, pistol, shotgun that you carry, or, that prototypical, if you could only pick these three, what would it be? And it's fun because it gives an insight as to that writer and what he thinks is important, the features, and just what is important to them, especially if they can only pick like one in certain roles. So Roy said, how about we bring that back up, but kind of update it, because the world has completely and utterly changed since the days of Skeeter Skelton and even Jeff Cooper. So we're going to talk about that. So Roy, in, let's see, in 1964 or 74, what was your 3-gun battery?
I was reading gun magazines in 1963 as a 9-year-old. I mean, Gun Digest. I still have my wormy copy.
Yeah.
I think something to remember that basically, let's say it was a staple. There we go. In every gun magazine, which there weren't that many, but usually 2 or 3 times a year, some gun writer, Jack O'Connor or Elmer Keith or Claire Reese or any of those guys would be assigned what is the best 3-gun battery, for shooters. And of course they would all groan. I mean, I actually wrote my share of those when I first started writing.
Yeah.
And, but I think we have to remember is at the time, I don't think the average sort of sporting gun owner, because in those days there wasn't the competition like we have now. There was NRA bullseye shooting, right?
Yeah.
That was about it. And so there were mostly hunters. I mean, when you look at the old NRA magazines and the old Guns and Ammo, even the old guns magazines, it was like the upland game hunting and deer hunting and what's the best deer rifle and varmint shooting. And so the average person I remember from the 60s, like we would go and visit and they were a shooter and they knew that I was gun crazy. They would say, well, you want to see my guns? And it's like, yeah. And if they had a little gun case cabinet in the living room, which a lot of people did, it was usually just some small thing. And there was usually 2 or 3, maybe 4 long guns. That was a lot.
Yeah.
And then most of them didn't have a handgun of any kind, but if they did, they'd open a drawer up and out from a sock would come a H&R top break revolver or an old Smith & Wesson 22 or something.
Yeah.
So at that time, I think people, and of course they didn't make. I don't think they made as much money, even proportionally, than they do now.
Yeah.
And so if you're a working blue-collar guy and you wanted to buy a new shotgun, you really wanted to have a good idea of what you should buy.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be like the gun you buy probably in the next 3 years or 4 years.
Yeah.
So I think that what helps to set the tone. And so they were always well read, and of course it was fighting words because people would say that, this or that or that. And I do remember then there was a phase, there was the perfect 3-gun battery for Alaska, right? The perfect 3-gun battery for the Southwest, for the Northeast, and the Plain States. Which just meant then that you had to write those articles all year.
Exactly. And, it's funny. I think about, I'm about 10 years younger than you. And even in my college days, I was kind of that weird guy on the floor of the dorm because I was into all that tactical stuff. But the only place you could get it was SWAT magazine, which I ended up being part of the staff for, and Soldier of Fortune. And met Robert K. Brown later, and that was kind of cool. But really, I mean, people looked at you like, "Why are you? What's going on there? What is it that fascinates you? Why aren't you duck hunting?" And
it's true, yeah. Because a lot of the hunters, they were all when Colt started to sell their AR-15 commercially, it was like, why do we need that, right?
Yeah.
You're right, though. And, it's funny about SWAT magazine, bless their hearts, and Soldier of Fortune. But SWAT magazine, especially, when you go back to those days and you look at it, it's almost embarrassing now. Huh? It's
Well,
like you go,
yeah.
oh God, did we really think that was cool? You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so, well, in my opinion, back in the day, say 1961, right? The average 3-gun battery was a bolt-action hunting rifle, usually a Remington model, something, Winchester, usually model 70. It might have been a Savage, I think, in those days. I think they had the early Savage 110s, or the great Mauser 98 war surplus gun that was converted by somebody, which they ranged from Abercrombie and Fitch, stunning guns to some guy cut the front fore end off in the garage with a hacksaw, and
I was going to say most of those I saw look like, who did this work? Beavers?
Yeah, it was like beavers did it, and
Yeah.
and they would go shooting military ball ammo with iron sights. I mean, that was it. There was a bit of the Model 94 guys, the Savage 99 guys, but it was some kind of, pretty basic centerfire rifle, and there wasn't that many really, if you think about it, right? And it was usually, 243, 270, right? 30-06, 308, not till later, really, and so that was it. And so it was a little easier to make that decision, so when I would write those articles, I would basically say, if you have someone who has a rifle that you like, shoot it, and if you like it, then you should buy that kind.
Sure.
No surprises. And the shotguns, it was almost always a 12 gauge, sporting length barrel, usually a choke system or a poly choke. Remember the poly chokes that you would turn, set that big trash can on the end of your muzzle?
Yep.
And of course, in those days, there were still bolt action shotguns. Yeah, I mean, that was.
Oh yeah.
I used to see a lot of those in my first shotgun I ever went hunting with was a bolt action 16 gauge with a poly choke on it, and but it was 12 gauge chokes. If you couldn't get chokes, then it had to be full choke.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was it. Pump. If you shot a semi-auto, everyone would stare at you.
Yeah.
Yep. And
well, even the 870 Wingmaster, and I think didn't they have a Field Master and lower grade or something? Those were expensive. I didn't know very many guys that had them.
You were fancy if you had one. Yeah.
You were fancy.
You were fancy. And remember, they're not Parkerized in matte blue. These were all beautifully polished, beautifully blued, beautiful wood, all basically, hand put together. And then if it was a handgun, because that was the third gun of your 3-gun battery, most of the time people would say, almost dismissive, like, and if you need a handgun, then we recommend a trail pistol like a 22, et cetera, maybe a 38 or something. And there was a lot of snubbies, though, as people's third gun. Yeah. Because in those days, I mean, it was like, if you were a guy, these are all World War II veterans. Many of them have been shooting at people and been shot at. So personal protection and protection of their family was still in the back of their brain. And so I saw a lot of old, 4-inch Colt police positives and 2-inch square butt Model 10s, hand ejectors, that kind of stuff. But so then if I had to sum it up, though, that was the classic 3-gun battery. So it was some kind of a probably bolt-action hunting rifle in 30-06, or 270. Some kind of a shotgun, sometimes single shot, not so much if you're really on a budget, though, right? A pump, as you say. There were some over and unders. There were still side-by-sides. They were
a lot of those.
A lot of those. Yeah, they were usually still leftover hardware store guns, that kind of stuff. Grandpa's 16 gauge side by side. I remember seeing a lot of those. And then, some kind of 22. There were some inexpensive semi-auto 22s brought in from overseas, from Germany and stuff like that. So, and there were a lot of surplus guns from the 50s and into the 60s. So I remember it was not uncommon for somebody to have the bolt action rifle, a pump action shotgun, and a Luger.
Yeah.
That they brought back from the war. I mean, it was really funny.
Well, and people would be horrified today to realize, like, if you wanted a modern, kind of expensive American gun, it was like the Colt, what was their semi-auto?
Python.
Yeah.
1911 Pythons. Yeah.
No. I'm in 22.
Woodsman.
Woodsman. That's the name.
Yeah, that was a cake eater gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
if I forgot about Woodson. High Standard had something too.
Yes.
And, but yeah, I do remember there was a lot of surplus guns, P38s. There was a lot of Webleys and Enfields. I recall seeing a lot of. They were importing the British Model 10s, the Victory models, but they were in 38 S&W, and so they would run a reamer in to make a 38 special.
Yeah.
Which really didn't work very well because it would expand the 38 cases and they would split and and the bullet would kind of rattle down the bore because it was too small. But I don't know. It was a simpler time though. But the 8-year-old, 10-year-old me, I remember sitting in living rooms, with that Hoppy's number 9 smell coming out of the gun cabinet.
Original Hoppy's.
Yeah, the original one that could kill you.
Yeah.
And then some guy, with a crew cut, and showing me some, gun. And I remember, hearing the clack of the bolt action shotguns opening up as he hands it to you. And then the men were always like over there smoking cigarettes, discussing duck hunting.
Yes. Well, I wanted to hit something before we move any further. An interesting sidebar is I think back to my early childhood, being around people that, when you would talk about this kind of stuff, I don't remember very many people carrying a 4-inch pistol, if they carried a pistol at all. I remember seeing, 38 snubbies, a lot of, Colt pocket, small semi-autos, things like that. But off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody that I saw that carried concealed a 4-inch. It was almost like frowned upon if you needed a gun like that. But then again, I was in a different place in the Midwest, and these were all farmers and hunters, and even carrying a gun was usually, it was something you stuck in your pocket if you had to make a bank deposit, or sometimes guys would go to the tavern and have a pistol in their pocket. But there wasn't a lot of really concealed carry in my earliest childhood memories.
No, and you're right. And there were not a lot of holsters.
Yeah.
I mean, really, the kind of modern leather started in the late 50s, through the 60s. And then that got broken wide open by John B. Yankee, where it became to the general, populace kind of. Before then, they were usually kind of handmade, old Westy stuff made by, saddle makers, but you're right, because in those days, that was still the heyday of the pocket auto, and and it was perfectly natural. If you had a Colt 1908, pocket auto and 25 ACP, well, that was a perfectly good gun. That's what you had in your pocket, and so and I don't think I saw some World War II era 1911s. I remember, but like you say, I never knew anybody. As I got older through the late 60s. I do remember meeting a couple of cops who carried them. Yeah. In pouch holsters on duty.
Well, I can remember, the first guys I ran into, and this was more late 70s, early 80s, that were starting to carry 1911s. And that was, you were a high-speed, low-drag gunslinger if you carried that 1911. And to me, not having any background in those, it's like, the hammer's back. Oh my Lord. And the bullet is the size of a drain pipe. What is going I'll never be, that cool to carry one of those.
At the same time, in the late 50s, say, and into the 60s, there was also, the perfect police auto, right? Mm-hmm. For instance. Well, you had the 1911, right? Yeah. Later, you had the what was it, Smith & Wesson 39 series, right?
Right.
And Then there were a lot of surplus guns, Walther P38, Browning High Power. I mean, that was kind of roundup of police auto pistols.
Yeah.
There they were. That's what you could choose from. And actually, and Lugers. I saw some, Lugers tossed into that mix. So, which I think is pretty funny.
Wow. And the hot shot detective might have carried a high power. Yeah,
pretty rare though. Yeah, usually they had. I saw 2.5 inch pythons. You were like, whoa, man, But usually it was a blued Model 36 or some kind of a detective special or something like that. So, but I definitely, as I read the gun magazines into the 70s, and by the late 70s, your typical 3-gun battery was definitely changing. But of course we also had more manufacturers, more gun models. It became more international. And so we were seeing more imports coming in, cheap guns and expensive guns. And about that time is when they started to, like I said earlier, break it down. Because your 3-gun African battery would be different from your 3-gun Kansas battery.
Yeah.
And so then we would cover those kind of things. And then finally it digressed into just what shotgun should you buy? That's the feature. And then what handgun should you buy? But I think if we had to translate all that in today, it would be hard to tell where to start.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense because what I do is, because I get those questions, you do too. I'm a new shooter. I'm thinking of going duck hunting. What shotgun should I buy? Yeah. And we have the luxury of saying, go to Walmart and what's on sale. It's just there is such a cross section of choices you have today, and they can be amazingly affordable. And they all work fine. A 12 gauge is a 12 gauge is a 12 gauge, and whether it's a $250 870 that's Parkerized or a $1,500 over and under from somebody, you're still going to get your duck.
Well, you make a great point, and if I may, I would like to jump on my soapbox here. And I know you're probably going to chuckle along with this because I know you face the same thing. New shooters especially, and less experienced shooters, way overthink the whole process. What's the best shotgun for sea ducks from a boat? Well, how about you just get a 12 gauge and learn to shoot it? And then you can use it for quail on light loads and pheasant and sea ducks and puddle ducks and, all that kind of stuff. And rifles are probably even worse. Well, I'm going to be hunting elk, and the outfitter says typical shot is 300 to 400 yards. What scope, optic, bullet weight, sling, muzzle device do I need? It's like, oh my goodness.
I know. Wears me out.
Yeah, it does. It does. And we're part of the problem. Hopefully we're not as much part of the problem, but the gun magazine is part of that. We're always pumping the new stuff. And now with the internet, guys and gals start, okay, what gun do I need? And you get 500 people. Well, you need a 458 Winchester. No. Just get a 22 long rifle. And, it's like, and everything in between. And then you throw in a couple of, well, I think hunting is cruel and awful and you should be ashamed. That's why I don't go to forums generally. If you're a new shooter or you're a shooter that's getting into another thing, just don't overthink it. Get a good all-round, all-purpose weapon of your choice.
3-gun battery. Huh.
Yeah. And then you can branch out from there. But I think that was the difference. Of course, obviously the times are different, but there weren't so many choices. There wasn't this hyper specialization. And as that famous quote from Robert Heinlein, specialization is for insects. Well, that's true. And, I've got a lot of guns now, basically by virtue of what I do. But when I was like just a working outdoor writer, I basically had a 3-gun battery and it served me just fine. So there's no dishonor in not having a special rifle for each yardage. You will be hunting 900 to 1,000 pound elk cows.
Well, I first of all, I would like to say that certainly I can speak for our magazines is that we we really don't ever say you need this gun.
Exactly.
We say here's this gun, here's what it can do. If this sounds interesting to you, if this meets a need that you have, well then here's one of them.
Yep.
But that's why and I know you do this too, is when people call or they write us a letter or something and they say, I want to go deer hunting. I have a Remington 700 and 308, but my buddy says I need to get a 300 Win mag. I know what we always do, what you do. I just say, well, no, not really. Your gun is perfectly fine. You should use that.
Exactly.
And so what we're dealing with, though, is I think we're dealing with two people, because I know people who are hunters, and you do too. And they've got like maybe two shotguns, a 12 and a 20, right?
Yep.
They've got probably two rifles, some kind of a 22 bolt action with a scope, or a pump 22, some kind of a center fire rifle that could shoot deer up to elk maybe, right?
Yep.
Some of them have a pistol of some kind, but usually it's just a pretty basic, 4-inch Model 10 38 they take with them to put a deer down with. And
Yeah.
I know those guys that are hunters, and they've had those guns for decades. And they're all blue worn, right? And been painted with spray cans,
Yeah.
And so there's those guys, and those are the hunters. They're not gun people.
Yeah.
And so I think those, like, they may actually really read a 3-gun battery article, because they're like going, well, okay, well, I go duck hunting, but I'm going to start going deer hunting now. What rifle should I buy? Whereas nowadays, I think, because the gun guys here say, as you say, oh, I need a 243 for this, I need a 380 for this, I need a 458 for that, and what need shouldn't be a part of any of those sentences.
Yeah.
You just want them.
Yep.
But I think if a new shooter came to me today and they was sitting down right over there and he says, Roy, I'm a brand new shooter. I've decided I want to build my first 3-gun battery. What should they be? Right? Well, I think the first thing I would do is I would say, well, what do you want to do? Right? And if he says, well, I want to shoot Missouri whitetails. I would like to do some upland game hunting here, quail and things like that. Maybe some pheasant over in Kansas. And then I would like to, shoot some squirrels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, then I would tell him to get some Savage bolt action 22 rifle and put a decent scope on it. I would probably tell him to get some kind of 20 gauge, lightweight semi-auto maybe, or pump gun, and then some affordable bolt action 308, and put a good scope on it and go have fun.
Yep.
Because for him, that's a pretty good 3-gun battery, and if he wants to add a pistol, I would probably say a Ruger Standard Auto, or a Ruger Wrangler, something like that in 22. And that's what I would do. What would you do if somebody came up to you?
Well, for that kind of thing, I think you hit it right on the head. The other side of the coin, though, is everybody today, when you say 3-gun, especially a lot of the folks that maybe I was with recently, they don't think about hunting deer. It's an afterthought. They're strictly black guns, black rifles, plate carriers, and tourniquets on your tuxedo and all that craziness. So, for them, it's going to be a bolt action, expensive chassis rifle with a $4,000 Night Force and 6.5 Creed, or some of the real new hotness. And of course, they'll have a 9, probably with a compensator and a TV on the top, and a shotgun. What is it? Oh, I have to have a shotgun and 3-gun, don't I? Well, I'll just get something. And I really think it's almost an afterthought. So, of course, I don't know how many of those folks are really going to be listening to our podcast. I think we're more in the practical bent, since we are lethal fuds. And, but I think that's part of the problem, is the whole industry has diverged so much, from our earliest roots of mainly hunting and that kind of thing with a little self-defense thrown in to now, that's what I think the majority of our friends at other brands focus so much on. And in that case, I don't know what I would recommend. I would go back to what you said, Roy, of get those 3 guns that will serve you in most cases if you want to trick your shotgun out to be a tactical gun, knock yourself out, maybe even throw some black match Cerakote on it. But if you're going to play at some of these other things, that's a whole rabbit hole that I don't know that anything I say people would really listen to. That's kind of a non-answer, but and kind of an opinion on my soapbox. But it's funny, and I'll tell you what. As I said, got me started being at this media event with guys my age, literally my same age, and they are so eaten up with tactical. The word tactical. And I'm like, do you ever think about just going out and setting in the woods and maybe seeing a deer? And it just doesn't seem to be at the front of their mind. And sometimes I feel like, Roy, maybe time has passed us by. I don't know. But,
no. Those people they look at hunting as a mission.
Yeah.
Right? Have you noticed that? A lot of the modern shotguns.
That's a good point.
They're carbon fiber and they've got optics and I see these pictures. You see them all the time. And the hunters are dressed and they look like they're about to do a room entry.
Exactly.
And they've got knee pads on.
Even duck hunting.
Yeah. Knee pads
they make it sound like, if you don't get the duck, it's you or the duck.
Yeah. Well, even the camo guys and stuff, a lot of that stuff looks, pretty tactical, which is fine. And that's the other thing I want to stress is that's nothing wrong with that. We support it. Go do it. Have fun.
Yeah.
There's so many manufacturers today that can cater to your whims and needs. For me, this was more of a trip down memory lane in that, we had the simple era back in the old days.
Yeah.
And
yep.
Most people were hunters. A lot of the shooters were members of the NRA. And at the time, that was all about hunting, and sort of formalized bullseye target shooting. And so everyone had a similar sphere of interest, and you could accomplish what you wanted to accomplish with a simple 3-gun battery. And nowadays, though, it's like everyone, they're super long range varmints, or they're competing in the 1,000-yard pistol matches, or they're, so the reality of a simple 3-gun battery is kind of non-existent, other than the needs are exactly the same. So you need some kind of probably a small bore long gun to shoot small game with, right? And maybe plinking, because you can't help it, you're going to do it. You need some kind of probably center fire rifle of some kind, I suppose in today's world it could be a contender pistol, right? And then you'll need some kind of a shotgun. So we still need a 3-gun battery, if you're going to do just about anything. And I think that's a really good way to start, especially if you're a new shooter. And I don't want to be arrogant and say, well, you have to buy the new Ruger, because if you buy anything else, you're an idiot and you're going to die.
Yeah.
Okay,
Roy, they're going to tear up your gun writer card for saying that.
That probably. But I would like to encourage people that especially if you're new to shooting, is that you really are dipping your toe in the water. And in your mind, you think, well, I should have a rifle and a shotgun, and maybe some kind of a pistol. I'm not sure, Well, then those are really good questions, and you need to just start doing that. And so I would get an affordable .22 rifle, an affordable shotgun of whatever catches your eye, whatever's in your price range, an affordable bolt-action hunting rifle with a scope, a Ruger, a Savage, of whatever's out, Mossberg, is whatever you have out there, and then start shooting. Go deer hunting one time. Go duck hunting with a guy who knows what he's doing. go sight in your 22 rifle and learn about shooting at 100 yards.
Yeah.
Buy some squirrel-sized targets, or staple up some 6-inch paper plates at 100 yards and practice. Because as you do that, then you begin to think about what your next 3-gun battery is going to be.
And then
right?
buy early and often.
Yeah, And I mean, if your initial 3-gun battery, we're not talking about competition here, like you said, that's something else entirely. But if you want to edge a little more tactical, if you're a gamer and you're 27 years old and you've got a job and you live in a little bit where you can afford it, well then fine, get yourself some tactical semi-auto 22, maybe one of the tricked out Ruger 1022s that they offer. I mean, you could buy a factory carbon fiber Ruger right now. That's an unbelievable gun, then ditto for a shotgun, get some Benelli, something cool looking, almost tactical looking gun. And for a hunting rifle, maybe for your first hunting rifle is going to be an AR, in some suitable caliber for deer hunting or some other things. So, but you still need those 3 guns, Yeah.
Yep. Well, in closing, I was thinking about something I've been kind of mulling over, and it occurred to me recently. And it kind of applies to this, and kind of just what you were saying is, we're blessed to know some of the best people at their particular jobs in the world, whether you're talking shooting, publishing, writing, and I'll even add motorcycling in this. The guys that are really, really, really good at stuff, what do they often find themselves using and messing around with? They go back to the basics, little motorcycles, single shot rifles, Roy Huntington, and things like that. So when you're choosing your 3-gun battery, don't feel like you have to have the most expensive, the most sophisticated, the most bells and whistles, because the guys that are really good at that and really know everything top to bottom, they tend, for the sheer enjoyment, which shooting should be enjoyable, they go back to the basics. So don't feel less of a shooter because you didn't buy a $5,000 shotgun. You bought something over at Walmart. So.
Yeah, well, because when you were 19 years old, your first car wasn't a top-of-the-line Cadillac.
Exactly.
Your first car had a loud muffler and had 190,000 miles on it. And so, I mean, I think if you truly are buying your first 3 guns, those are not the guns that you're going to have a year or two later.
Yeah.
I mean, because you're going to learn. And but I think that's the thing, is just be thinking about this. Is I wouldn't be too concerned over, is this the best? Does this fit my niche perfectly? Right? Because your niche is going to change anyway. You're going to go like squirrel, right? Suddenly you're interested in this. But I think for me is get off your butt and go and start that search.
Yeah.
So, maybe you already have a shotgun. Maybe you already have a 22 rifle. Well, great. That's 2 out of 3. Now concentrate on, getting the other thing. What I equate it to is people always say, what computer should I buy? When computers were new, right?
Yeah.
I had one of the first Apple Macs and 2C. I was in at the ground floor of all this. And people would say, what computer should I buy? And I was told by a software engineer early on, he said, no, that's not the question. The question is, what software do I need to do the job I want done? Mm-hmm. And then what computer will run that software? He said, because you may buy a computer that it won't run the software you need, right, in those days. And I think this shooting is a lot like that, is that you don't say, what shotgun should I buy? You say, I'm going to go long-range duck hunting. Then that's software, right? So then you need what hardware can help you accomplish that job, right? And so if you apply that to your 22 rifle, your shotgun, your centerfire rifle, you can't go wrong,
Exactly. Well, great words of wisdom as usual, and we'd like to hear what you think of what your perfect 3-gun battery is, and leave us a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube, or you can reach out to us, editor@gunsmagazine.com, and tell us what you think. It's fascinating stuff, and it usually turns into a podcast episode topic down the line.
It's
So keep those cards and letters coming. But Roy, I appreciate you joining me, and I appreciate you suggesting the topic, even though the old school gun writers are rolling in their graves going, oh, not another one.
Yeah, 30-06 Model 70, damn it. You know?
Yeah, exactly. So thanks again. It was great talking to Roy Huntington, and hopefully we gave you some insight if you're putting together your first or your next 3-gun battery. Before we go, some housekeeping things. Of course, like and subscribe. I always ask, but it's that important. Please make sure you like and subscribe so that we can keep bringing you the Guns Magazine podcast. And if you would like to really support us, you can go to fmgpubs.com. There you can buy our special interest publications and books, and you can subscribe to Guns, an American Handgunner magazine. Once again, that's fmgpubs.com. And of course, don't forget our great sponsor, Armscor.
The new STK from Rock Island Armory. Experience the power and precision of the Rock today. For more info, visit armscor.com.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For everybody that works so hard here at FMG Publications, I am Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat, reminding you for another week, now get out there and get shooting.